Count Corley, I propose to take questions 3 to 5 together. The programme for a partnership government was agreed in May 2016 during the formation of government. This is a 5-year programme of work being undertaken for the duration of the present Dáil. The government publishes an annual report each year, the second of which was approved by Cabinet in May 2018 and is published on gov.ie. I expect the next report to be published in May 2019. This report will reflect the significant work undertaken by all government departments to deliver progress across a wide range of issues, including housing and homelessness, education, health, rural development and Brexit contingency planning.
Thank you. Taoiseach Deputy Howlin.
One of the central tenets and commitments in the programme for government was, and I quote, we will provide additional exchequer capital if needed to deliver on our commitment to bring about next generation broadband to every house and business in the country by 2020. Now clearly that commitment is not going to be delivered upon, and I think a lot of people across the state are very fearful now that not only will it not be delivered upon in the time set by the end of next year, but it may never be delivered upon. So can I ask the Taoiseach, just in relation to that very firm commitment, what is the status of the National Broadband Plan? In view of what we've learned about tendering, is he satisfied that the tender that has been agreed by government is robust? The nature of that tender, is it still the government's commitment to provide to virtually every house, if not to every house, a direct fibre link? That's fibre to the home or fibre to the business. In relation to the comment you make yourself yesterday about lowballing and the comment from the Minister of Finance this morning that something went very wrong with the Children's Hospital tender, will the tender for the National Broadband Plan, will it be reviewed in the light of what you now know?
I'd be interested to hear from the Taoiseach whether the tender process that has been already agreed to can proceed. There's many people waiting, particularly in my own constituency of Donegal and in rural parts of this country in particular. They're waiting for broadband, and this has been a bit of a shambles with deadlines missed over and over again. But the programme for government states that you will alleviate the pressure on households' budgets, and you name a number of them: energy, childcare, medical and insurance costs, and it's that latter one that I want to focus in on here. Yesterday morning we had Minister Darcy on the radio trying to explain away the huge increases that are being faced by soft play centres and other businesses, and he started talking about whiplash, which I don't think really happens in these play areas. But he then used the excuse of some, and I quote, "some members of the judiciary are awarding bananas off the wall amounts." Maybe the Taoiseach will let us know whether, if he agrees with his minister as to this is the reason that it's really blamed the judiciary. He actually blamed the Minister for Justice at one point in the interview as well. But we have a serious problem in terms of the soft play areas. In Donegal, in my own constituency, we've got premiums going up from $2,500 in 2017 to $6,500 in 2018, and that's a 160% increase with actually no claim. We have another centre in Donegal and Inishowen that actually closed down, citing at the core of it high insurance costs as the reason. We've had a company in Meath that went from $2,500 to $16,000 in 5 years, again with no claims. The problem here, Minister, is this is a monopoly. There is no insurance company in Ireland that will actually quote these. There is only one insurance in Britain, and yet the working group that was set up by the government is simply failing. And we have a minister who's blaming the judiciary, who's blaming his own colleagues in the Department of Justice for blocking his Plan A or Plan B, and he's now on Plan C or D or something of that nature. And the real question is when are we going to see some serious action in relation to this here, such as the Garda Fraud Unit, such as real action in terms of the insurance industry, instead of more or less of the blame gaming that's going on.
Barrett, please.
Taoiseach, over the last year in particular, I have raised repeatedly with you the issue of the income thresholds for social housing. Your programme for government commits as an absolute priority, makes extensive commitments around the provision of affordable housing to our citizens as a priority. And yet what's actually happening because of your failure to address the income thresholds, there's a cull, a very significant cull of people who are being taken off council housing lists. Some of the examples I have of people 15 years on a housing list, and because of overtime, I have 3 cases because of overtime they have to do to pay the high rents on the private market, then takes them off the housing list, and they lose 15, 10 years of waiting time in the housing list, and they're left in limbo because their income could not possibly allow them to afford housing on the private market. I appeal to you to expedite the increase in these thresholds, and even to issue some instruction to say that people who are forced to do overtime shouldn't be taken off the list, and that those that have been are put back on. So I really appeal to you on that. Just lastly, I just want to say, Taoiseach, I have a Valentine card for you. In fact, I have a lot of them. They're not to profess my undying love for you. They are from school children who were outside the Dáil today. These are from John Scotus National School. There was kids from Educate Together schools all over Dublin. And they are for Valentine's Day tomorrow, making an appeal to you and to Minister Bruton to take more radical emergency action on climate change, something you also promised you would do in the programme for government, and that those kids feel you're not doing so. I wanted to let you know that, and maybe hand these over to you afterwards, and you might consider what the kids who were protesting outside were saying today.
Thank you very much. Have you any Valentine cards, Deputy Martin?
I have some, but not for anybody in this house. Could I put it to you that yesterday's belated apology from Minister Harris was accompanied by a list of projects for this year that will be delayed, and the Taoiseach must admit that it's beyond bizarre that the Minister for Public Expenditure claimed that the overspend is serious, but no project anywhere would be cut. So is this, I put it to Taoiseach, the first time in recorded history where 400 million will be taken out of a fixed budget, but everything will still get done? And I think, can you tell us when you'll be updating the rest of the figures impacted by the overrun? It's not just this year, it affects the whole NDP. Last year you did tour the country with your ministers, you promoted projects which won't be finished for a decade or more. You know, it went on and on, you know, but which you supposedly had allocated money to. So, no, they won't even be started in a decade. So if you can be specific, Taoiseach, well, maybe, I don't know, if the Taoiseach can be specific about 10 years of promises when launching the NDP, can't you now be specific about this huge hole in the NDP, which the overspend represents? And the fact that the single largest project impacted by the cuts this year is the A5 has caused real anger and concern, not just in the North East, but to everyone who knows how important that road is to relations on this island. Just like Narrow Bridge, people are concerned, Taoiseach, that we're witnessing another case of Dublin backing off the scale of engagement with North-South infrastructure, which was taken for granted even during the worst years of the recession, that we would get those done. Now, I know government is blaming the lack of the Assembly and the Executive for that, but I think we need more detail on that. And finally, on the delayed HPV vaccine test, Taoiseach, again, forgive me for saying this, but like, one gets the sense from government that announcements are made, commitments are made, glibly or very shallowly. So, for example, it was announced with great fanfare that we would have this HPV last September. Then that didn't happen. We were told it would be January. And then today we're told by health officials they can't give a date. Now, they do blame the Minister's decision, the backlog that has been created last April as a result of that decision around the smear tests, that there's now about 90,000 of a backlog. And that's now their priority, and as a result they can't focus on the HPV. And you yourself said this morning, well, there's a whole lot of pre-tendering stuff still has to be done. But how did the promise get made then? How does anybody say in September, or when this broke out in April, May, that, oh, we'll definitely have the new test in by September, and now it looks like it can't be introduced for 2019. So I think, you know, forgive people for then not attaching credibility to anything that gets said by government or committed to by government. I think we need a more detailed timeline in terms of that issue itself, in terms of the HPV vaccine. And also, you did say this morning that you did acknowledge that under pressure you made decisions from the heart over the head. I would argue that the decisions maybe were more political, knee-jerk responses in response to an unfolding crisis. But there are real lessons to be learned from a whole series of promises and announcements that were made that never really had any chance of realisation. And it's no way to respond to a crisis. And the knee-jerk reaction that occurred, I think, has now created damage and delay to projects which are desirable and should be priority.
Thank you very much. Taoiseach to reply.
Thanks very much. Just in relation to the introduction of the primary HPV test, that's something we're very keen to get done and something we're absolutely committed to. The original target date, I understand, came from the Department of Health, who would have got it from the HSE or cervical check, and that wasn't met. So I don't think it was a time or a target time that was invented by a politician. It was one that came from the same officials who are now saying that they're unable to meet that target date. So obviously I won't be expressing a target date until I'm convinced that whatever date is given to us by HSE cervical check and the Department of Health is one that we can hand over. You often find in politics, unfortunately, and you've served as Minister as well, that other people break your promises for you, and you can make commitments in good faith, but agencies and people who had committed to deliver sometimes don't. I don't think dealing with the backlog is the reason for the delay in commissioning a new test. It's a different test. In terms of the national broadband plan, the tender prices are in from the last remaining bidder. They've been evaluated by 2 external parties, an expert panel involving international expertise, an outside consulting firm, and also obviously by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform and the Promoting Department, which is the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Energy. We're not yet in a position to appoint a preferred bidder, which is the next step. And after that would be signing the contract. We still have some due diligence to do and some decisions to make. In terms of the project and the tender, as I understand it, it's 95% fibre to the home, but there's flexibility given to the company around the last 5% to use alternative technologies, provided it meets a minimum speed of 30 megabits per second. I may be wrong about that, but that's my recollection, and that was in specifications from the very start of the process. The tender is a very different one to the National Children's Hospital. I think it's important to say that, because people asked would it be reviewed. The National Children's Hospital is it's a build contract, and it's done in 2 phases. This will be a single one, so we will know if and when we sign it what the final cost is and what the possible contingencies may be. And also, unlike the National Children's Hospital, this is a PPP, so the cost of it is spread over 30 years. And the private company forming the public-private partnership with the government has to invest in it. So it's a very different contract than the National Children's Hospital one for those 2 reasons. Deputy Boyd Barrett raised the cost of living. Energy costs obviously are not under the direct control of government. They relate to prices on international fuel and energy markets. But we haven't taken actions that would increase energy prices. They've gone up and down, as they often do with the markets. But our government policy, obviously working with the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities, is to increase competition in the sector in order to reduce prices. I think you also mentioned childcare in terms of the cost of living. An awful lot has been done in that area. Early childhood education extended to 2 years for every child. Maternity benefit increased and will increase again in March. Paternity benefit introduced for the first time. About 50,000 dads have availed of that already. It'll increase in March. Parental benefit being introduced later this year. An additional 2 weeks of paid parental leave for parents. And then, of course, there's all the various actions that have been taken to reduce the cost of childcare, which will culminate in the affordable childcare scheme, which will kick in towards the end of the year. And that has already increased subsidies for childcare and extended subsidies to more and more parents. The next step will happen again towards the end of the year. I think it's October or November, where parents in receipt of subsidies will have those subsidies increased, and about 10 or 20,000 middle-income families who currently don't qualify for subsidies will do for the first time. And these are, two-income couples earning up to 100,000 qualifying for subsidies for the first time. On the NDP, I dispute the idea that there's a black hole in the NDP or Project Ireland 2040. It is a 10-year funding plan. That's 116 billion euros allocated over a 10-year period. And in that 116 billion euros, there is a contingency as well. Admittedly, it's in the later years, but the contingency is there. And we anticipate being able to manage within the 116 billion euro envelope over 10 years. And we haven't increased the ceiling for this year. It remains 7.3 billion for this year. There's also the opportunity as well to change some of the projects from direct capital projects to PPPs, thus changing the spending of that profile. So it's built on the idea that there will be very few PPPs. By having PPPs in some areas, that will spread out the cost and actually free up money, because it will spread the cost of some projects beyond 10 years into 20 and 30 years.
Thank you.
Thus freeing up money, which can then be allocated to projects where there are overruns.
We'll move on to the next set of...
Yes, same answers I gave you.
Okay, now, 1 minute. Deputy Doherty, what did you say?
The premiums and whether he agrees with Minister Doherty's view.
Okay, well, I have to move on because I have to move to the next set of questions, 6 to 9. Taoiseach,
there were four people answering questions, and he chose not to answer all my questions.
well, the time allotted, I'm conscious of the fact that we have...
On a point of order, Chairman, that's not correct. I wrote down the questions and the answer in which I was asked them, and I went down by them one by one, and I didn't get to social housing and climate change. Okay. That's what I do.
Well, look.
So I need more time.
That I would have come in before Deputy Boy Barrett, and you didn't answer my question, and you did answer some.
Okay, well, look.
Yours is the next.
I'm moving on to the next
insurance. It actually was the next. Before social housing and climate change.
If you wish to take up your...
But if I'm given more time, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a brief opportunity to answer them very, very quickly. Very quickly.
I'll answer as quickly as I can, but thanks.
Because I want to move to the next set of questions.
Yeah, on the insurance, as I mentioned, Minister Darcy is heading up a number of actions to reduce the cost of insurance. We've seen motor insurance already fall since it peaked in the middle of 2016. Health insurance has stabilised, and public liability insurance is now the major focus of his attention. That's particularly around working on a book of quantum, which would be more realistic and more in line with other countries, which we would then expect to have a knock-on effect in terms of reduced premiums. There's also going to be much more data gathering around settlements to see if they're out of line, and more action around fraud in particular, which is an issue. On climate change, obviously, the government's efforts on climate change focus in three main areas: on investment, on the carbon charge, and also on regulation. Investment being what's in Project Ireland 2040, which will get us about 1/3 of the way to meeting our climate change targets for 2013. It's investment in renewable energy, it's investment in public transport, it's investment in home insulation, all of those things we need to do. Regulation is decisions we've made, for example, to end the burning of coal by money point in 2025, taking peat off the grid, and banning the sale of new diesel and petrol cars from 2030. And the third area is the climate charge, and we're working on the model on that at the moment. And you do need to do all three. Nobody honestly believes that you can meet your targets unless you're willing to do all three. So I do hope that Deputy Boyd Barrett told the people who gave him the Valentine's card the extent to which he objects to a carbon charge, and why it wouldn't be possible to meet those targets without a carbon charge that drives changes in the behaviour of people in business.
Next 6 to 9, Taoiseach. Next set of questions.